The Louis Burke Frumkes Center for Writing and Culture at Hunter College presents 10 years of best-selling authors and great thinkers. Each week we broadcast new videos from our 10-year speaker archive online for free at our website. We look forward to seeing you again when it's safe. Please enjoy this presentation from the archives of the Louis Burke Frumkes Center for Writing and Culture at Hunter College.
Good evening. My name is Louis Frumkes. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm the director of the Writing Center here at Hunter College in Continuing Education. This is part of the best-selling author series, and I'm going to introduce Andre Aciman in a minute, but I should tell you that after Andre, we have Patty Volk coming up, and then J.D. McClatchy, who's an important poet, professor of poetry at Yale, and Molly Haskell, the film critic and writer of books about film. And then we have we have a series called Great Thinkers, and we have Margaret Geller, who is hasn't won a Nobel Prize yet, probably because of sexism in male science and the Swedish Academy, but she has mapped the universe. I remember in 1988 she took me out on a Cray computer to the visible ends of the universe behind the Great Wall at the end of space, and we snapped photographs 200 million light years out, and she is quite a brilliant, fascinating woman, and if you've ever wondered what it's all about, she may be able to tell you. Maybe, because I'm not sure anybody knows these days. And then we have Harry Evans. Harry Evans is one of the great editors of our time, and he's going to be talking. And then we have Ned Block. Ned Block has the reputation of being the world's expert on consciousness. So you can't go to sleep when he's speaking. And he was head of the philosophy department at MIT. He's now at NYU, and he's a wonderful, wonderful speaker. I know him for a long time. Anyway, tonight is why you're here, and I'm delighted to see you all here. And I should tell you that before I introduce Andre, that there are books over there in case you would like him to inscribe a book for your friend or family. And we had refreshments over there. Some of you have already identified those, but they're free. So our speaker tonight exhibits that rare combination of qualities, great talent and exceptional modesty. He does not look his nose down at lesser beings. In fact, in the main, he is charming and funny with most anyone and is loved by his students. But for the record, Andre was born in Alexandria, Egypt, and is regarded as an American memoirist, essayist, novelist, and scholar of 17th century literature. He has also written extensively on Marcel Proust. His work has appeared in the New Yorker, the New York Review of Books, the New York Times, the Paris Review, the New Republic, as well as in many volumes of Best American Essays. He received his PhD in comparative literature from Harvard and has taught at Princeton and is distinguished professor of comparative literature at the CUNY Graduate Center. He is currently chair of the PhD program in comparative literature and founder and director of the Writers Institute at the Graduate Center. He's the author of numerous books, which I'm sure you have read, but is probably best known for his memoir, Out of Egypt, and his recent novel, Harvard Square, which was absolutely delightful. Please know that after his talk, as I said, he will be happy to inscribe books. Please help me welcome Andre Aciman. Andre?
Thank you, Louis. It's nice to be here. I don't think I've ever spoken here before, so this is a first. I have lied to you, Louis. I said I wasn't going to read. No, I hope not. I said I wasn't going to read something, but I am going to read. I'm going to try to limit the reading as much as I can, because frankly, you can read it yourself. But it helps me to set the tempo for some of the things I want to say today. One of the questions that comes up when I think about myself, and since I'm speaking about myself, I might as well be humble and say that I'll talk about myself, is what am I about? Among other things, who am I? What do I want? Where do I repair to when I want to be with myself? Can I be with myself? These are questions that we don't always ask ourselves, but they do come up when the fundamental question is, am I more myself when I'm speaking to you? Am I more myself when I look at myself in the mirror? Or am I more myself when I'm writing? Because all three are really me. Now, I'm sure that you're dying to know who the real me is, but you would much rather prefer my speaking about the paper me, because that is the person that I think is more visible, more interesting. And one of the things that comes to mind when I'm speaking about a paper me is that obviously it's contrasted to another kind of me that is not a paper me. And sometimes, very often, when I'm asked about the memoirs I've written, which is the real you? Did this really happen? People always ask me if this really happened. Did you do that? Did you say that? Did you hear that? And the answer is always, I don't know, or I don't remember, because at some point one doesn't remember any longer. One doesn't know. But the real issue that concerns me when I'm speaking to people is, what is it that you want to know when I'm speaking about myself, since this is about me? And I would suggest that there's really very little that I have to say. I am an Alexandrian person. I was born in Alexandria. I am known as a nostalgist. In other words, a person who yearns for the past. And frankly, I like nothing better than the present. The future terrifies me, but I'm really not enamored of the past as much as people think I am. People think I'm very lyrical. If you read my stuff, you know I tend to be lyrical. But you also know that I have a very nasty streak in me, and that I like to make fun of people, particularly behind their backs. People think I love Alexandria, because after all I come from there and I lived my childhood there. But frankly, I detest Alexandria. I never liked it. I'm well rid of it. I was invited to go to Egypt at the end of this month, and I said I'll think about it, and then I realized that I really don't want to go to Egypt. I have nothing to do there. So I am, in fact, I write, as I've always said, I write to seek out the memories that I have of Alexandria, because that's what a nostalgist does. But frankly, I also write to put to bed and to forget the memories that I have of Alexandria, because I really am not that interested in Alexandria. I once wrote an essay about smells, and I was always wondering, you know, I always like to buy aftershave products. I don't know if you like perfumes or aftershave products, but that's my one sin, is that I really like to buy as many aftershaves as I can because I want to collect them all. But one of the questions that I ask is, okay, so there's this scent, there's that scent, there's smell, that smell. What is my smell? What is the one that I will repair to when I really want to discover what my scent is? My father's was lavender. That was easy. But I don't know what my scent is. I'm always changing scents because I don't have a localizable scent. And funnily enough, one of the things that comes to mind when I say all this is that, isn't that typical of an Alexandrian? Not to know where he belongs. All Alexandrians who come from my generation will tell you that I come from a city that used to be wonderful, but guess what? It doesn't exist any longer. Of course, Alexandria is there. I went to visit it. It's still available to anybody who wants to visit it. But the one I'm seeking, and the one that most people from my generation remember, is no longer in existence. And doesn't that work for me? In other words, as a writer, I can say that I belong to a place that no longer exists, and that therefore I can go back and forth in my mind and not take a position. I once wrote an essay about what is my hidden identity, if I have an identity. And I realized that I don't have an identity. I'm not so sure I like myself. We're all supposed to like ourselves, correct? But when you think about it, there are many things about myself and about my past that I'm not proud of, that I wish I hadn't done, or that I wish I had done, and I might still do again, or maybe not. I don't know. And it's this fundamental ambivalence that I was trying to address today, because it's in everything I write. The ambivalence is overwhelming. In other words, it is the desire to root oneself into something, and as soon as I have stated it, to take it away and go elsewhere. I can begin to write a sentence, and I don't know how many of you do this. You write a sentence, and as you're writing the very sentence you're writing, you realize that this is all wrong. I should stop writing this sentence, or I should go elsewhere, because I don't like what it's doing. So halfway through everything I write, I'm already changing my mind. And what that does do is that it implicates everything that you're going to say. It casts a shade of bad faith in everything. So, having sort of slandered myself big time, I begin to wonder, is this something Alexandrian? If you hear anybody from Alexandria, and I'm thinking particularly of a man who died last year, a singer called Georges Moustaki. I don't know how many of you know him. He's a French singer who was born in Alexandria, who sang about being a homeless, nostalgic traveler who womanizes all over the place and who's longing to go back to a lost garden. Clearly, he's talking about something in his past. And so basically, there is an Alexandrian who's given us a good example, and there's a previous Alexandrian, a far more eloquent Alexandrian, who said that here you are in this city, it inhabits you, and the more you try to divest yourself of this city, the more it pursues you and won't let you go. And that particular poet is Cavafy, the Greek Alexandrian poet. So I'm in good company. I'm among people who don't know who they are. So let me read something that I wrote, and this is part of the lie that I gave you that I wasn't going to read. I was born in Alexandria, Egypt, but I am not Egyptian. I was born into a Turkish family, but I am not Turkish. I was sent to British schools in Egypt, but I am not British. My family became Italian citizens, and I learned to speak Italian, but my mother tongue is French. For years as a child, I was under the misguided notion that I was a French boy who, like everyone else I knew in Egypt, would soon be moving back to France. Back to France was already a paradox, since virtually no one in my family had ever set foot in France. So this is part of the identity that I convey to you. It's a sense of dislocation, dispossession, and it comes also with a sense of humor. And I'm going to read some more from Harvard Square. Hi. This is, let me speak a bit about Harvard Square because it's my latest book. It's my latest book, and it's a story about, here I am, an Alexandrian Jew in Cambridge, Massachusetts, as a graduate student. It happens to be true. And I meet this Arab person who is fulminating against America. He basically hates America. He thinks that everything in America is not just jumbo, but it's also ersatz. It's all fake. And he invades against America in every possible way. Now, it so happens that I wrote that speech of his. I wrote the speech. He never made that speech. I made it up, okay? In other words, he's part of me. I've just sort of transposed myself into him and made him say the most outlandish things, which maybe I think, but that I didn't want to be the one to say them. I wanted him to be the one to say them. So I contrast our identities, and you will understand what I'm doing after my little spiel. Here I am comparing myself to him. I was shifty. He was upfront. I never raised my voice. he was the loudest man in Harvard Square. I was cramped, cautious, diffident. He was reckless and brutal, a tinderbox. He spoke his mind. Mine was a vault. He was in your face. I waited till your back was turned. He stood for nothing, took no prisoners, lambasted everyone. I tolerated everybody without loving a single one. He wrote, he wore love on his sleeve. Mine was buried layers deep, and even then. He was new to the States, but had managed to speak to almost everyone in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'd been a graduate student for 4 years at Harvard, but went entire days that summer without a soul to turn to. When he was upset or bored, he bristled, fidgeted, then he exploded. I was the picture of composure. He was absolute in all things. Compromise was my name. Once he started, there was no stopping him, whereas the slightest blush would stop me in my tracks. He could dump you and never think twice of it. I'd make up in no time, then spite you forever after. You get the point, okay? These are two characters who are drawn to one another because they are the exact opposites of one another. He did exist. This man happened to exist. But in my fabrication, he was exactly the opposite of me. But he was also me. He was me. I was giving him a voice, and I was making him into my foil, as if I needed to have another identity in order to write about myself. And so let me read some other part, and maybe you will have questions. In essence, I never really belonged in America. It is my home, but it doesn't really feel like my home all the time. He was never an American. He was never going to become an American. In fact, he was deported from America. And yet together we had a friendship. And in that friendship, we had one thing that we both loved, and it was the idea of France. It wasn't France, it was the idea of France. So let me read you this, and now you'll understand what homelessness does to you. What finally cemented our friendship from the very start was our love of France and of the French language, or better yet, of the idea of France. Because real France we no longer had much use for, nor frankly it for us. We nursed this love like a guilty secret because we couldn't undo it, didn't trust it, didn't even want to dignify it with the name of love. But it hovered over our lives like a fraught and tired heirloom that dated back to our respective childhoods in colonial North Africa. Perhaps it wasn't even France, or the romance of France we loved. Perhaps France was the nickname we gave our desperate reach for something firm in our lives. And for both of us, the past was the firmest thing we had to hold on to. And the past in both cases was written in French. Every night, and the one thing we did was basically we womanized. Every night in the bars and the coffee houses of Cambridge, Massachusetts, we'd seek each other out, sit together, and for an hour or so speak in French of the France we'd both loved and lost. He was in Cambridge because he was running away from debt, from alimony, from who knows what ill-fated scrapes and illicit ventures he'd gotten himself mixed up in France. I was in Cambridge because I still hadn't found the courage to pack up and try to make France my home. We were, when we eventually ran into each other every night, the closest the other would ever get to France. Even the skittish intensity of his tidbit notions, plucked from working-class cafes in France and transposed to the dim-lit coffee house of Casablanca, kept the illusion afloat, until Last Call. Last Call made things more urgent, more desperate, for when they turned on the lights and we finally walked out of the bar to face a deserted Brattle Street, we already presaged the sobering realization, yet again that night, as always at night, that this was not France, was never going to be, that this was all wrong, would always be, that France itself was just as wrong, because we were wrong everywhere, here as in France, as in our respective birthplaces, that no longer was our homeland. We blamed Cambridge for not being Paris, the way over the years I've blamed many places for not being Cambridge, which is like blaming someone for not being someone else, or for not living up to who they never claimed they were. So what I was trying to do in this particular moment, this is very annoying, apologies, is to give you a sense of when someone is rootless and feels slightly dispossessed and feels that intellectually and emotionally and psychologically he is also deracinated, that he is shifting everywhere, that there is no home, there is no homecoming to anything, to any person, to any identity, to any idea, that everything is essentially fungible and can be given back and returned the way we do when somebody gives us a present which we don't like. We give it, not, we don't return it, we pass it on to someone else who eventually might give it back to us, not remembering that we were the original givers of the present, and so forth. It's a sense of, how shall I put it? It's ultimately, and I hate using the word because it's not accurate, it's what happens when you are in exile, when you're not at home. When and the definition of exile that I like to give is when, not that you have a home somewhere and you're not there, but that you have forgotten and are unable to even define what the very concept of home is. You are basically adrift. And one of the things that I've done in some of my books is to call them by that name. One of my books of essays is called False Papers. In other words, false papers are the papers that you had when you try to escape a place and you don't have a passport, so you buy a false paper, a false identity. And the other title of another book I've written is called Alibis, which means you are elsewhere. That's what an alibi is. You are always, always elsewhere. You're not in any place. Your mind is somewhere else. And that, I think, is the definition of being adrift, or if you want, of being in exile. And nostalgia, when you think about it, which is the love of the past or the ache to return someplace, is really a sort of a shoddy notion because it doesn't capture what the very essence of adriftness is about. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. You'll probably all have some questions. I'm sure these were very provocative thoughts. Someone I know once defined adrift, if you're comfortable with it, as the signal of good mental health. But I suppose that if you're not comfortable with it, we've got a problem. Who would like to ask Andre questions? Don't be shy. He won't dislike you.
Hello.
Hi.
So where do you consider home?
I don't know. I mean, even saying I don't know is already fraught. I mean, I would like to say I think my address is in Manhattan Avenue on the Upper West Side, blah, 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 but it's not really my home. And even attempting to answer the question is already a deceptive posture. So I don't want to answer that question because anything I say is wrong. Even saying anything I say is wrong is already implicates me.
Who else has a question before this microphone gets more excited? Gentleman here.
So thinking about what you had said, the idea that you're adrift and feel homeless means that you think you ought to have had a home. But that necessarily is true. It's not necessarily true. So does that mean that you had an idea of home at some point
No.
and then lost it? Or do you think
No.
that you see other people and they have an idea of home and you wish you had that? Where does
Yes,
the idea that
no,
there
no.
ought
I
to be
do
a home?
envy people who have an identity. I envy people who have a nationality, who have a feeling of, who have a a religious identification, who are patriots, who are enthusiasts of one thing or another. I don't have any of that. I lack that gene totally. So that I don't have a belongingness to anything. Let me answer your question a bit better. When I always knew I was going to be a writer. That was the one thing I wanted to be. So when I was in Egypt as a kid, I knew at the age of 13 that what I was experiencing was something at least important to me and that I would write about it one day. I knew that. But the one thing that I remember now when I go back to that particular day when I knew that is that I didn't like being in Egypt. Now I might sometimes feel that I miss maybe occasionally the life I had in Egypt. But I know that when I was in Egypt, I couldn't wait to get out. My home was going to be, as I said in the book, was going to be France. I belonged in France. And of course, the first thing that happened to me when I got to France, I couldn't wait to leave. Okay, so I was not an Egyptian. I never felt Egypt was my home. In fact, I belong to the generation of colonialists, so we were never going to become Egyptians. It was not part of who I was. But on the other hand, I had friends who were Egyptian, and they felt at home. They were patriots. They were nationalists. They had an identity. I didn't have that. I had bought a passport. I had lost a passport. I was born Turkish, believe it or not. I don't know a word of Turkish. But it was really my nationality, but I couldn't feel that. Then we became Italians, and I didn't feel Italian at all. I mean, it was just a piece of paper that we repossessed because originally we had been Italian 150 years ago. So the whole thing is a myth. So there was no identity. There was nothing I belonged to. I went to a British school, which had become very nationalistic against the Brits. I might have been pro-Brit at that point because I will always take the countervailing position. If you have a position, I'll take the opposite one because that's me also. So throw that into the mix, it becomes a mess. But no, and I haven't spoken about my feelings for Judaism, because one of the reasons why I was very good friends with the man I called Kalash in this book, Harvard Square, is because he had no patience for Islam. So he could be my friend because I had no patience or tolerance for my Jewish identity. I have never liked being a Jew. I don't like religion, period. But since I had one, I had to sort of dispossess myself of it right away. Although I envy people who have rituals, religious rituals, because it's nice to have a ritual. You go to church, you go to synagogue, you go to the mosque, you do anything. You have something, and you are religion means to be tied in with people. You are tied into a whole group of people that you do things together. At the end of a service, people in America shake hands, do they not? Sometimes they embrace one another. That's very nice. Please don't embrace me. Okay, please don't shake my hand. I don't have anything in common with you. I'm just sitting here because I don't know why. It's that feeling of like, ooh, please, enthusiasm. Not me, not the stuff I like. So in essence, it's as if I have recused myself. Originally, on the day I was born, I had already recused myself of planet Earth. I don't want to be part of it. And life too is a problem. So, but I'll stand for it for a while.
Do you have children?
Why do you ask the question?
I'm just asking. Just curious.
Yeah, I have children.
Your children, that's why. That's right.
Oh no, my children are as exiled as I am. I made sure. I'll give you a good example. This is an example I love because the first thing I did when I had children, and that's the me. That's the biographical me. That's not the writerly me now. Okay, you wanted to know the biographical me, who is of no interest to anybody, but the me who happens to be the me, who could be a paper me. One day I decided my children needed to know French because that's my language. I was brought up speaking French, though I was not French. So I bought a very expensive edition called Ma Première Histoire de France, which is my history book. For every French child has a history book. And we turned the pages, all my kids, we would turn the pages together and look at the battles, the famous battles that made France, France. And part of me, of course, hates the whole idea of French patriotism. And then we come to the Battle of Agincourt. And you look at the Battle of Agincourt, and from the French perspective, it's the battle of the Brits against the French. And actually, I think the English probably won, but in the view of the French, it's the French victory that happened. And as I'm teaching my sons the Battle of Agincourt, Henry V, I'm saying to myself, I don't know which side I'm on. I mean, I love England because I went to English school, so I learned all of English history. But I also happen to be sort of have an affinity for France. So I don't know whose side I'm on. It's like being being in a weird position where after World War II you ask yourself, whose side was I on the side of the Nazis or the Brits? I don't know. But it's the same thing with France and England. You know, they hated each other for centuries. So in a way, I don't have an answer for that either. Yes, I have children, but I have tried to poison their brains.
Are you successful?
You have to ask them. No, I've poisoned their brains by doing one thing, which I know they know because they're very good at it, they're better at it than I am, by inculcating a sense of irony, which for me is probably the highest form of intellectual activity someone can have. It is to understand that there is an other version to the very thing you're thinking right now. That there's another identity to the very identity you have now. That everything you say has a countervailing version which is going to come out any moment now, and expect it and bring it about. So, yes.
I'm interested in your concept of home, even if you think it's wrong, or it is wrong after you say it, but if you had home, what would the comfort be? What would the circumstance be?
If I had a home, and you expect me to answer that? No, it's very difficult. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. I mean, ideally, I would probably be in Alexandria. In an Alexandria that I can recognize, because the Alexandria I visited about 10 years ago is not the Alexandria I knew. It's totally different. The population has totally changed. So the languages have changed. Alexandria was multinational, multilingual, multi-ethnic, multi-everything. It is no longer that. So I don't belong there. I couldn't live there. But ideally, if the same culture could exist again, yeah, it would begin to be home. But of course, remember that an Alexandrian defines himself in opposition to everything around him, including Alexandria. So it's like a bad Gödel theorem. Okay, you basically are against everything, including who you are. But ideally, in a kind of mythic universe, probably it would be in Egypt. But that Egypt doesn't exist any longer. So I can say that, and it has no bearing on anything.
Would anyone, gentleman over here?
I was listening to what you said, and the actor, Marcello Mastroianni, was interviewed by Playboy in the late 60s. And they asked him, why did he become an actor? And he said, because I don't know myself, I don't know my identity, and I'm searching for myself in my acting, in my art. Question I have for you, most artists, and regardless of what the form is, sculpting, painting, writing, could that add to their creativity, that they are searching for something?
Yes. You're asking, I mean, the questions that, as a writer, you're constantly, I mean, if you're going to be honest, I mean, you can fly from honesty very easily as a writer. That's easily done. But if you want to stay on course and really address the questions that are sort of throbbing in your body and in your mind, and that mean something to you, and therefore, if they mean something to you, they will mean something to other people, it is very important to assume that paper, in my case, not film, that paper allows me to spread out possible versions of myself. I'm always elaborating an identity on paper. Every paragraph I write is simply an alteration and a deepening of my voice.
Your imagination, your art, which is writing.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think there's somebody here who would know better than I do what Mastroianni was saying. But I think he was right. You're always searching. I don't know what it means to search for an identity. I don't know what that is. Since
Well, you mentioned an identity.
Yeah.
That's why I asked. But it's the same as looking for yourself.
Yeah, and actually, I said that I didn't like myself, but it is the only self that I consider important enough to get to know better.
A lot of people on the planet don't like themselves.
No, but I mean, I need to know myself, and I don't have much time left, so I better do it fast. The point is that identity, whatever that means, is all we have, and we might as well make the best of it. And for me, the best I could do is to put it on paper and with a proviso that tomorrow, when I reread what I've written on paper, I might say this was all lies. This was all wrong. I intentionally deceived paper. That happens. And I think the best person who knows this is, Michel de Montaigne, who constantly takes back what he has said and says, I take back things because I don't understand repentance. So he's contradicting himself almost intentionally. But that's what happens when you're a writer, or any artist does that, I think. You're constantly putting out on some kind of form something that has no form whatsoever, which is the you, the me.
All right.
Okay.
I think on that note, we'll thank Andre for a very provocative talk, and you are invited to go over there and pick up one of his lives and see
If he lied.
see if he told the truth or he lied. Obviously, a very good writer, and he'll be happy to inscribe them to any of your friends in Alexandria, France, Italy, wherever they are. Thank you very much for coming.